Hello and happy Valentine's Day, my friends. Let's banish all loneliness by accompanying ourselves with these terrifying true stories that happened in the wilderness. The following are episodes 69, lol, and 70 of Alone in the Woods, a podcast I host about scary stories from the great outdoors. Follow and review Alone in the Woods on Spotify and Apple Podcasts for more. Thank you, and enjoy. The woods are full of mysteries, shapes that shouldn't be there, sounds that don't belong, and presences that seem to follow you wherever you go. Tonight's stories will take you from the eerie forests of Maine to encounters with creatures that defy belief. Welcome back to Alone in the Woods. I'm Darkness Prevails, and tonight we delve into chilling tales of the strange and the sinister, all set against the backdrop of the wilderness. If you've had your own spine-chilling encounter, share it with me at darkstories.org or eeriecast.com/outdoor. It could be featured in a future episode. And don't forget to leave a rating or review on Apple or Spotify. Your support helps us bring these terrifying stories to life and keeps the fire burning for more. Now, throw a log on the fire, because the night is still young. Maine's Skinwalker, from J. Hooks. You may have heard that Maine is a wilderness state, a sanctuary of the woods, and in those woods are some things better left undiscovered. Unfortunately for me, I was unlucky enough to find one. For some context, I am relatively new to hunting. I always thought it was great and have always liked the idea of it, but almost never actually have time to get out there. What I do a lot, though, is small game hunting. I use a daisy pellet gun and shoot small game, such as chipmunks and squirrels. They taste good, and also they are a problem where I am. My father has a garden, and they frequently burrow in. Needless to say, they would damage the gardens and even kill some of the plants. With this being said, it was a Saturday, and I would have been out hunting deer if I had my license. I hadn't gotten around to renewing it that year, and didn't plan to until next week. So I decided to hunt chipmunks. I normally also carry a 9mm pistol as well. My father had told me some scary woods stories when I was younger, and I didn't believe them, but I always brought it just in case. Today, I decided to go without. That was my first mistake. Instead, I just cleaned out my pellet gun and walked up behind my house. I planned on shooting 3, as that would normally be enough for a few salads, or maybe even enough to fry them. Anyways, I walked a decent distance from my house, maybe a quarter mile, and then I noticed something. A hollow quiet, an unnatural silence, almost as if the birds were too scared to chirp, the wind too scared to blow. It was unnerving, but I figured nothing of it. That was my second mistake. Looking back, I really wish I had turned back. Unfortunately, I didn't. I decided that since I would shoot all 3 chipmunks before heading back. After a while, the silence broke, and I continued walking. I eventually did come across an animal, but it wasn't a chipmunk. It was a deer. Its head was missing, and its intestines were spilled all over the ground. I was unnerved to say the least, but I continued on. I must have walked a quarter mile more, and then I saw a face, or no, not a face, a head, an expressionless, faceless head. I saw it only for a moment, then it was gone. That same deathly silence returned. I didn't dare to move. Each breath seemed so loud. I wanted to turn back. No, I needed to turn back. I looked around slowly, very carefully. I didn't see whatever that thing was, but I did see a chipmunk. A large chipmunk. But it was a chipmunk. Even in my panicked state, I didn't want to go home empty-handed, so I aimed, steadied my hands, and fired. I hit it in the chest. I saw it fall over. I walked over to pick it up, and then it stood back up onto that log. I knew my shot was good, but I decided to take a second. This time I watched it bleed from the bullet wound. But it was different. A thick, black ooze, slowly dripping, its piercing gaze still fixed on me. I had listened to Darkness Prevails before, and had heard about skinwalkers, but I had never heard of them taking the form of such a small creature. I didn't know what it was, but it wasn't natural. I then saw its body twist and contort, its fur shedding, and its figure growing taller and taller. It was the size of a full-grown man by the time I turned away, and I ran. I heard it crashing through the forest behind me, tearing through the bushes and emitting a terrifying, unnatural scream. Even with my adrenaline, I knew I couldn't run a half-mile at the pace I was at, and I needed another solution. I was frantically racking my brain for ideas when I tripped over a root, falling onto the wet ground. I felt something cold and hard grab onto my ankle. I couldn't break loose, though I struggled and kicked. Not knowing what else to do, I reflexively pointed my pellet gun behind me and fired. It was enough for it to release me from its grasp, and for me to kick free and run. I remember hearing its screams closer and closer each time, until eventually I broke through the forest into my yard. I ran inside my house and took my .308 from the closet it was in. I ran back out onto my porch as I saw it in the tree line. I fired a round that had to have hit center mass. It retreated into the woods, howling and screaming, but not in a pained way, more like it was angry over losing its prey. I haven't seen that thing again, but I have heard that silence and seen more animals torn apart. It almost seems to be taunting me, making me know it's there waiting for me somewhere in those woods. Medieval-looking arrow and ominous skull ring randomly appeared in my yard. From Meme Lord Martin. This story took place in 2007, when I was in 4th grade. I grew up in a desolate town in upstate New York. I didn't have a lot to do as a kid. One of my pastimes was to go into the yard or woods behind the house and aimlessly screw around. My yard was surrounded by woods on most of its perimeter, with no fence. In the front yard, there was basically a refueling station for wild birds, a bird feeder, bird bath, and an amateur attempt at some sort of rock sculpture. I preferred to go into the backyard. At the time, the house was undergoing minor renovations and didn't have a back door yet, so I had to go out the front door to get there. I would pass by the array of bird stuff and rock sculpture every time I went out. One warm spring day in the middle of a week, I had finished my homework early enough that it was still decently bright out, so I decided to go outside and fool around. I wasn't keeping track of time, but I saw the sun get low in the sky and decided it was time to go in. Surely enough, it was dinner time. I noticed something unusual on the way in, though. There was a long, skinny object protruding from the ground in between the rock sculpture and bird feeder post. It was an arrow. I plucked it out of the ground to inspect it further. I knew there were deer hunters in the area, but rest assured, this was not a hunting arrow. It looked almost medieval. Instead of a streamlined tip with blades in 3 or 4 directions and a plastic or otherwise synthetic-looking shaft, this one sported a broad chevron-shaped tip with a wooden shaft. I stuck it back in the ground, not really knowing what else to do with such an object. Later that night, after my father had thrown scraps from dinner out in the compost, I overheard a conversation that revealed he and my mother had taken note of the wayward projectile. "The deer hunters are getting clumsy," I heard him say. I couldn't tell how he meant it based on the tone of his voice. I didn't know whether he was trying to make light of an occurrence that would have understandably weirded him out, or if he really thought that the obviously not of this era arrow was just the waste of an imprecise hunter. He had decided to keep the arrow in his garage. The following day, I finished my homework early as well, so I did my usual. I didn't notice anything strange going through the front yard. Even the hole that the arrow had left in the ground was only visible from a certain angle, and if you were deliberately looking for it. Once again, when I noticed the sun was beginning to lower, I went inside. And for the second time, something caught my eye. A small metallic object on the rock sculpture reflected the rays of the setting sun right in my face. It was a ring. A ring featured 3 skulls on its face and was adorned with other ominous symbols along the band and undergallery. The way it was propped on the stone, the 3 skulls were facing directly at me as I passed. I was too weirded out. I hurried inside and proceeded to not say a word about it to my parents. I ended up getting my hands on the ring. My mother had collected it, and sometime later was going to throw it out, but I salvaged it from the pile of soon-to-be trash. I guess by that time, I had come to see it as more of a cool trinket, and the sting of its origin as a vague threat had worn off. I have kept the ring to this day, and have not been able to identify it as being of any known retailer or jewelry maker, in spite of hours of attempted research. I still don't know what someone was trying to tell us between the arrow and the skull ring, nor who that person could have been. The Bigfoot that hunted Nazis. From Dark Lore. I never imagined I'd be sitting here, telling the story. It's my story now, but it began with my grandfather, Halvor, and what he lived through in those dark times. He called it the tale of the Bigfoot that hunted Nazis. My name is Leif, and I'm a new listener from Norway, and what I'm about to share has been whispered around campfires in our family for generations. It's a story that makes you wonder if there are things out there, deep in the wilds, that defy our understanding, things that guard the ancient lands with a fury none of us can comprehend. Norway's cold, jagged mountains had seen centuries of conflict, but none like this. Wars had come and gone, echoes of Viking raids and skirmishes between rival clans, but now a darker shadow stretched over the land. The towering peaks, dusted with snow and crowned by mist, had always stood as silent witnesses, enduring the brutal elements and bearing scars from ancient battles. Yet the invasion that crept through these forests and valleys was different, an unrelenting force of occupation that sank its claws into the heart of Norway. The Nazis brought not only guns and soldiers, but a chilling sense of domination, as though they sought to conquer not just the people, but the very spirit of the land itself. I remember my days during the war well. In 1940, after the brutal battle at Narvik, the first Allied victory in World War II, the air felt different, charged with a heavy, unspoken tension that lingered in every shadow. The victory had been hard won, a bloody struggle in which I had fought fiercely, standing shoulder to shoulder with men defending our homeland. Yet even as the last shots faded, I sensed something ominous in the air, a creeping dread that chilled me more than the bitter winter wind. I knew my homeland was vulnerable, a fragile line drawn in the snow, and while my fellow resistance fighters and I were bound to this land by love and duty, we were now almost entirely alone. After Narvik, the Allied forces withdrew under the cover of night, leaving Norway exposed to the brutal ambitions of the Third Reich. As I watched the last French and British ships slip over the horizon, a hollow feeling settled within me. Abandonment, betrayal. We had risked our lives, believing we were part of a larger cause, only to find ourselves deserted. The Germans returned with unbridled vengeance, more determined than ever to stamp out resistance and secure control over the region. They flooded Norway with troops, pouring in like a dark tide, and unleashed their brutal will on the helpless population. Families were torn from their homes, villages were razed, and anyone suspected of aiding the resistance faced swift, merciless punishment. The Nazis set up checkpoints, patrols swept through the countryside, and the once quiet mountains became hunting grounds. The land itself seemed to recoil under the oppressive weight of occupation, a silent witness to the horrors unfolding upon it. Every step I took, every move I made, I felt the presence of those relentless soldiers closing in, intent on destroying anything and anyone who dared to stand against them. I was marked for death by the Waffen-SS Nord, elite mountain warfare experts who hunted me with unyielding precision. These men were masters of survival in harsh terrain, bred for the snowbound warfare that Norway's mountains demanded. I knew they would not tire, would not falter until I was either captured or dead. So I turned to the only refuge I had left, the vast wilderness, a land as unforgiving as it was familiar. Here, among the towering trees and frozen cliffs, I believed I could vanish. But even as I pushed deeper into the wilderness, leaving behind any trace a tracker might find, a sense of unease began to creep in. I felt the weight of something I couldn't name, a presence that seemed to shift through the shadows. It was as if I had stepped into a realm beyond the reach of men, a place untouched by time and darkened by secrets far older than the mountains themselves. This was a presence beyond human understanding, something ancient and watchful, lingering at the edges of my vision and sending chills down my spine. The forest, which once felt like an ally, now felt like a world apart, where the line between man and myth began to blur. The Sami, a nomadic people with deep roots in northern Norway, have lived in these lands for thousands of years, far longer than even the Vikings. This is a region of dramatic fjords, sweeping valleys and jagged peaks blanketed by snow for much of the year, a place that seems untouched by time, where the wilderness has remained fiercely untamed. Sami legends speak of ancient beings who guard this rugged terrain, one of which is the elusive Stalu. Said to be a giant troll-like creature, the Stalu is a mysterious and powerful force that moves through the dense forests and snowy mountains, almost like a shadow. They say he appears only to those who disturb the land or venture too far into its hidden places, as if protecting the delicate balance between nature and mankind. It's whispered that the Stalu can shift form, blending into the landscape like a ghost, watching in silence and choosing carefully when to make his presence known. To encounter him is rare and often ominous, a warning for those who fail to respect the wild. The days were cold and bitter, each breath biting against my skin and clawing its way into my bones like a relentless predator. Frost clung to every surface, coating the trees in a thin layer of ice that glistened under the pale sun, transforming the forest into a hauntingly beautiful realm that felt both enchanting and foreboding. The delicate frost crystals sparkled like tiny diamonds, casting an ethereal glow that momentarily distracted me from the chill that seeped through my thick woolen coat. Yet, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, the warmth it offered quickly faded, and an ominous silence enveloped the woods. When night fell, the world transformed into a harsh, unforgiving landscape. Darkness crept in swiftly, swallowing the dim light of day and cloaking the forest in shadows. The air grew denser with an almost palpable weight, pressing down on my shoulders as if the very forest itself was closing in around me. The cold seemed to intensify, a biting chill that sank deeper into the earth and spread through the frozen landscape like a merciless tide. Every rustle of leaves and every crack of a branch echoed ominously in the stillness, amplifying my sense of isolation. As I trudged through the snow, I could feel the biting wind whispering secrets of the long, dark hours ahead, each breath a reminder of the fierce struggle for survival in this relentless wilderness. The snowy mountains around me loomed, their peaks lost in swirling mist, the ground beneath my feet obscured by a thick blanket of snow. The cold bit deep, cutting through my layers, and the wind howled as it whipped around me, carrying with it flurries that stung my face and blurred my vision. The world felt narrowed to the few feet I could see ahead of me, the white of the snow merging with the gray sky above. The storm intensified, and soon all I could make out were vague shapes, the trunks of trees, dark silhouettes against the endless white. In the forests, an eerie silence blanketed everything, as if the land itself were holding its breath. Even the wind seemed to hush, threading gently through the branches, too afraid to disturb the quiet. No birds sang, no animals stirred. The usual sounds of life were absent, leaving only the muffled crunch of snow beneath my feet and the faint, rhythmic beat of my own heart. It was a silence heavy with secrets, with shadows hiding in every crevice, pressing close as if waiting for something, or someone, to break the stillness. One night, crouching low to gather water from a stream, I heard a sharp knock echo through the trees, a sound reminiscent of wood striking wood. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as I scanned my surroundings, instincts heightened. The forest was cloaked in darkness, the moonlight barely piercing through the dense canopy above. Another knock followed, and then a third, each strike resonating through the stillness like a heartbeat. The sound was almost deliberate and rhythmic, as if it were a coded message reverberating through the night. My breath caught in my throat as my mind raced. My first thought was that the Nazis were closing in, perhaps signaling each other in the dark with this eerie staccato pattern. I shifted my weight, crouching deeper into the shadows, straining to discern any movement in the thick underbrush. The cold seeped into my bones, but the chill I felt now was different. It was fear, raw and palpable. The forest felt alive, each rustle of leaves and snap of twigs echoing ominously in the silence. My eyes darted to the dimly lit path I had just traversed, wondering if I had been followed. I held my breath, listening intently for any other sounds that might betray an enemy's presence. But instead of footsteps, I heard the knocks again, sharper this time, reverberating through the trees, igniting an unsettling curiosity within me. Was it truly the Nazis, or was something else at play in this desolate wilderness? The thought of being discovered sent shivers down my spine, yet a strange sense of intrigue began to overshadow my fear. I realized that whatever was making the sound was deliberately drawing attention, challenging me to respond. The primal instincts that had kept me alive for so long warred with an equally compelling urge to understand what lay beyond the veil of night. The knocks continued, faint but unsettling, reverberating through the trees like a distant heartbeat. Each sound sent a jolt of adrenaline coursing through my veins, urging me to retreat. I instinctively moved deeper into the forest, away from the stream, my mind racing with possibilities of what, or who, might be out there. The shadows enveloped me, thick and suffocating, and the biting cold gnawed at my exposed skin as I navigated through the underbrush. As I pressed on, trying to distance myself from the source of the eerie sound, an unsettling sensation settled over me. The forest felt different, alive in a way that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. It was as if unseen eyes were watching, lurking just beyond the reach of my vision. I strained to listen, every snap of a twig and rustle of leaves amplifying my growing anxiety. I had learned long ago to trust my instincts in the wild, and now they screamed at me that I wasn't alone. Suddenly, a low growl resonated from somewhere deeper in the trees, a deep, rumbling sound that sent chills racing down my spine. I halted, heart pounding, and turned to look over my shoulder. The darkness seemed to shift, and for a moment, I thought I saw a shadow flit between the trunks, large and unmistakable. My breath quickened, and I felt a primal urge to flee. Yet another part of me hesitated, captivated by the unknown. What kind of creature prowled these woods, making its presence known through echoes in the night? Was it a wolf or something more sinister? The realization that I might be in the territory of something wild and powerful filled me with a mixture of dread and intrigue. The knocks resumed, closer now, their rhythm almost hypnotic, drawing me in as I wrestled with my fear. Whatever was out there was asserting its claim over the land, a reminder that in this frozen wilderness, I was merely a visitor, and the true inhabitants of the forest would not be so easily ignored. The days dragged on, and with each passing hour, my unease grew like a shadow creeping closer. At first, I came across faint signs, massive footprints in the snow, their depth suggesting a creature far heavier than any animal I had ever encountered. Trees stood broken and splintered, as if a tremendous force had barreled through them, leaving jagged edges that glistened with frost. Perhaps, I thought, it was an animal, a bear, maybe. But no, the footprints were far too large, and the trees bore witness to something that defied the laws of nature. They were split at unnatural angles, creating a haunting landscape that felt both awe-inspiring and terrifying. And soon, I began to hear the Nazis again, their voices muttering through the woods, increasingly frantic as they strategized in whispers. Some spoke of wolves, their voices low and laced with fear, while others speculated that it might be an organized group of resistance fighters prowling the area, attempting to disrupt their operations. The tension in the air felt electric, charged with uncertainty as I moved cautiously, my senses heightened. One fateful night, as I stumbled through the snow, I heard them closing in, the SS relentless in their pursuit. I pushed on, the storm intensifying, snow blinding me as I struggled forward. I stumbled and fell, my body rolling through the thick snow until I crashed into something hard. Pain shot through my leg, and I groaned, clutching my knee as I tried to push myself up. The wind howled around me, and through the haze of snow, I could see nothing but an endless expanse of white. I knew I couldn't stay there. I forced myself to my feet, each step a battle against the searing pain in my leg. The cold bit into me, the storm swirling around me like a living thing, obscuring everything in its relentless fury. Then, through the snow, I saw it, a dark opening in the side of a cliff, a cave. I limped toward it, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. Inside the cave, darkness swallowed me, wrapping around me like a shroud. The air was damp and thick with an earthy stench, a mixture of moss and decay that clung to my senses. With each cautious step, my flashlight flickered uncertainly, casting eerie shadows along the stone walls. I limped deeper into the cave, desperate for shelter from the Nazis, my heart pounding in my chest like a war drum as I took in the strange cave markings around me. Ancient Sami paintings covered the walls, their vibrant colors dulled by time, but still telling powerful stories. They depicted animals in motion, warriors engaged in battle, and something larger, an immense human-like figure with broad shoulders and wild, staring eyes that seemed to follow me as I moved. My breath quickened as I traced the outlines with my fingers, feeling an unsettling connection to the artistry that surrounded me. These paintings seemed to tell a story, warnings about a guardian of the land, a being that maintained balance, appearing and disappearing like a shadow. I shivered, a chill coursing through me that had nothing to do with the cave's temperature. I realized I had wandered into a sacred place, a part of the Sami wilderness that even the Vikings had feared to disturb. Legends of such creatures had been whispered around fires for centuries, stories of the Stallo, a fearsome, solitary being that haunted the mountains, punishing any who dared to intrude upon its domain. The very thought of it sent a jolt of fear through me, making me acutely aware of the danger I faced. Suddenly, I heard them. Footsteps crunching in the snow outside, the voices of the Nazis closing in. Panic seized me. I moved deeper into the cave, my back pressing against the rough, cold surface of the stone as I heard them enter. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, casting long shadows on the cave's walls, illuminating the paintings in flickering, ghostly light. "Where did he go?" one of them hissed, frustration lacing his voice. "He couldn't have gotten far." I held my breath, forcing myself to remain still. My heart thundered in my chest, and I prayed that the darkness would be enough to shield me. The beam of a flashlight came dangerously close to where I crouched, and I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the inevitable. Then a low growl echoed through the cave, a sound so deep and resonant that it seemed to vibrate through the stone itself. The soldiers froze, their expressions shifting from determination to sheer terror. I opened my eyes just in time to see their faces go pale, their flashlights trembling as the growl grew louder, reverberating through the cavern. A shadow moved, blending seamlessly into the rock before disappearing into the darkness. One of the soldiers shouted, raising his rifle, his finger twitching on the trigger as he fired into the black void. The sound of the shot echoed like thunder, but it did nothing to dispel the darkness. If anything, it made it seem even deeper, more menacing. Another scream erupted, chilling in its intensity, then cut off abruptly. I watched, barely breathing, as panic spread among the soldiers. Their bravado crumbled as they retreated, their flashlights flickering wildly, beams of light bouncing off the walls and casting distorted shadows that seemed to dance along with the chaos. One by one they fell, their screams swallowed by the cave, their bodies disappearing into the shadows. I could do nothing but watch, frozen in fear and awe, as the guardian exacted its vengeance. The cave fell silent once more, the oppressive quiet settling around me like a shroud. I remained there for what felt like hours, the darkness pressing in on all sides, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Then, slowly I heard it, a low, rhythmic knocking echoing through the cave. The guardian's warning, telling me that I was not welcome here. I knew I had to leave, to honor the guardian's claim over this land. But before I could move, the air grew thick, almost choking me with an overpowering earthy scent. Damp moss, decay, and something else, something metallic, like blood. My heart pounded as I slowly raised my head, my gaze locking with the creatures. It stood before me, massive and imposing, towering over me with an air of ancient authority. The dim light from my flickering flashlight barely illuminated its figure. Broad shoulders covered in thick, matted fur, a face that was a haunting blend of man and beast. Its eyes, dark and intelligent, burned with an ancient fire, reflecting a wisdom that seemed to transcend time. They bore into me, unblinking, and in that gaze, I felt something that reached far beyond fear. It was as though the creature was evaluating me, not just seeing me, but understanding the essence of who I was. The earthy scent of damp moss and decaying leaves filled the air, mingling with something metallic, a tang of blood or raw power, as if the creature itself embodied the primal force of the forest. Its eyes held a deep and unyielding power, an undeniable message that this was its land, its territory, and I was nothing but an intruder. The growl that rumbled from its throat was low and resonant, almost a warning, and I understood without a doubt. I did not belong here. I locked eyes with the creature, and it felt as though time itself had frozen. The intensity of its stare was unlike anything I had ever felt. Its gaze wasn't just seeing me. It was seeing through me as if it understood every fear, every weakness I had ever known. The earthy scent grew stronger, wrapping around me like a thick fog, each breath filling my lungs with the weight of something primordial. The creature took a step forward, and I flinched, pressing myself against the rough stone wall of the cave. The fur that covered its body shifted slightly with its movement, revealing powerful muscles beneath. It was almost human, yet undeniably not. A being that belonged to another world, one far older and more primal than my own. It lowered its head slightly, bringing its face closer to mine. The air between us grew colder, and a deep rumble emanated from its chest, a growl that seemed to resonate with the very stone of the cave, vibrating through my bones. The creature's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I swore I could understand what it was trying to say. "You do not belong here," its gaze seemed to convey, a message filled with a weight that transcended words. The deep rumbling continued, a primal warning that I was an intruder in a sacred place, a realm governed by forces far beyond my comprehension. I swallowed hard, unable to move, barely able to breathe. I wanted to run, to flee from the sheer presence of this ancient being, but my body refused to obey. I was frozen in place, held captive by the sheer power of its gaze. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the creature turned away, its massive form melting back into the shadows of the cave. It moved with a grace that belied its size, vanishing into the darkness as though it had never been there. The heavy, oppressive air began to lift, and I finally exhaled, my breath coming in shaky gasps. I knew I had been given a chance, one final warning to leave this place and never return. The Guardian had spared me, but I understood that my presence was not welcome here. I pushed myself away from the stone wall, my legs trembling as I struggled to stand. Slowly, I made my way to the cave's entrance, the rhythmic knocking still echoing faintly in the distance, a reminder that I had trespassed into a world that was not mine. The first light of dawn was beginning to filter through the snow-laden trees outside, and I limped into the cold, fresh air, grateful to be alive. As I moved through the forest, the storm began to subside, the wind easing its relentless howl. The memories of my encounter clung to me like shadows, a reminder of the power that lay hidden in these ancient lands. The Guardian had made its message clear. This was its domain, and I was nothing more than an intruder. Years later, as the fire crackled in the heart of winter, I would share this story with my grandson, Leaf. With every telling, the tale of the Bigfoot that hunted Nazis grew richer, woven with both fear and awe. I would speak of the Guardian who saw humans as curiosities, frightening, loud creatures that changed the land to suit themselves, carving out spaces where none were needed. With each telling, the knocks in the forest grew louder in Leaf's imagination, as if the land itself were reaching across time to remind him of its power. A quiet but eternal beat, the pulse of a world untouched by humankind. As I spoke, the shadows at the edge of the firelight seemed to lean in, animated by whispers of the past. The forest grew still once more, yet for those who listened closely, the faint rhythmic knocks would forever echo, a testament to the land's ancient guardianship and a warning to any who might disturb it. It was a call to honor the wild, to tread lightly on a land that would one day reclaim every trace of human presence, leaving nothing behind but silence. In the end, the legend of Bigfoot endures, woven into the very fabric of the land. It has become part of the lives of those who venture into the wilderness, a lasting reminder of the fragile balance between humankind and nature. For those who dare to ignore it, the guardian will always be there, watching, waiting. It watched us while it drank. From Gojo's Six Eyes. My parents were big spiritual retreat enthusiasts, and I'm sure it had a lot to do with them being such a young couple who were enjoying traveling to unknown places and experiencing the world around them. You'd think that would have ended when they started having kids, but you'd be wrong. They still went on their retreats into the wilderness, and sometimes they took us, their kids, along. One such family retreat trip took place at a forest sanctuary. It was literally situated in the jungle, a beautiful, too unreal sanctuary built not to stand out, but to blend in with the wildlife that surrounds it. All you hear is the consistent choir of bugs, leaves dancing in the wind, creating a waterfall of greenery white noise, and the chattering of monkeys. My gosh, the monkeys never allowed a day to go by peacefully. As if that wasn't enough, their favorite pastime was sitting atop the tall trees and throwing the nuts and seeds down at the retreat members. They threw anything they could get their grubby hands on, and chattered louder when the people below screamed and scattered to avoid the assault. Moving on, there was a large and deep lake, situated right in the center of the area, designed for sanctuary retreats. It had trees growing all around it, and faced an opening that led much further into the jungle. You could see a narrow downward trickling of a little clear stream right into the larger pool. It made such a beautiful sight because the jungle opening was slightly split at the top, and you see a silver line of the sky, almost like a thin fabric you could swipe to the side with a palm, like a thin veil of some sort. You could get a direct whiff of the fresh jungle scent when a particularly strong wind blows through the foliage. Now there were specific rules for swimming in the lake for all retreat members. The swim time was rotated and designated according to gender, age, and time. Fathers and sons from 8 and above bathed together with the men at the lake from a specific time of the day, while boys from 2 to 8 bathed with all the girls and women as they were still young and dependent on their mothers. The men and boys always went before the women and children because it takes much longer to get the children out of the lake. My brother was barely 5 years old, so he swam with my mother, sister, and I. Mind you, I was around 10 or 11, and my sister was around 7 years old. My mother ensured that my sister and I knew to always remain in the shallows close to the edge while she went in deeper with my brother, since she had him. That day, the men were done with their swim time as usual, and they also had an activity meant for just them. So the women, girls, and children had all the time to swim and frolic around the lake for longer than necessary. A lot of people had left the water by this time, though, lounging in the large gazebo that offered protection from the mischief of the monkeys rather than shade from a sun successfully blocked off by the tall trees. All kinds of activities were going on: little picnics, naps, gossip circles, games, and running around by the children, etc. I'm pointing this out to make it clear that there was a scant amount of people in the large lake, and a lot of activities going on for anyone to notice anything. Now, my sister and I were in the shallows, where soft sand could be felt under our feet, The shallows were much closer to the mouth of the deeper jungle, and situated at the back of the lake. If you were approaching the lake from the bamboo gates, the retreat organizers set up for privacy, meaning that in order to get into the shallows, you'd have to go around the circumference of the lake and turn your back to the opening of the jungle. Once you were in, you could then face it. The point is, the deep end was the first point of contact with the lake, not the shallows, which is usually the reverse case with bodies of water. But I guess the lake backed the retreat gate rather than face it. My sister and I were in the shallows, putting us in close contact with the mouth of the deeper jungle. And while we were frolicking and splashing so loudly amidst all the noise and chattering of wildlife and humanity, we suddenly sighted eye shine, like if a mirror caught a ray of sunlight and momentarily blinded you. It was a very bright, luminous eye shine, poison yellow-green, with a wicked black slit right in the middle, like the beginning of the making of a gaping abyss on the surface of the earth. The position of the eyes lay mid-height behind some leaves. The sun shining a spotlight through wasn't helping matters either. It went through the low bushes and cast a brighter glow to the eyes. I'm getting a chill now just remembering it. It was just those eyes behind low bushes, peeking through the blades of green. Then 2 bony protruding appendages slowly rose like a rotating gear. They rose and fell as whatever it was got closer. The rhythm reminded me of bike pedals as they rose and fell on the back of this thing. A quick rustle through the low bush, and then emerged a bright red tongue. It just lapped at the little trickle of clear water from the stream that flowed into the large lake we were submerged in. Its eyes stared right at us as its bright red tongue lapped at the water. My sister and I just stood there frozen in fascination, not at all in fear, as this creature drank. It didn't take its eyes off us, even for a second. It didn't move, and neither did we. It remained concealed in the thicket, though, and soon enough, the tongue receded, and then a rustle of the bushes, eyes receding without taking them off us, and then nothing. We just stood there pruning in the lake for a moment before we looked at each other like, "Did you just see that?" I was such a Nat Geo wilderness geek, and I was having a David Attenborough moment. I didn't see anything besides glowing eye shine, skulking shoulder bones, and a vivid red tongue, but I thought it had to be a cat of some sort. In our squeals and excited screams, I noticed a tall wooden post that had a warning written in such corny and cliché red, "Danger, do not enter," with a poor kindergarten pirate-looking skull and bones drawn. I make no apologies for the fit of giggles I burst into upon seeing that signpost. It definitely was a dangerous encounter, but we didn't fully grasp that. However, knowing what I know now of just predators in general, staying still definitely kept the encounter calm. What was a bit confusing was how it didn't seem to be concerned with all the noise from the gazebo, oblivious children screaming and playing around. It didn't look around in their direction even once, and it made me wonder just how long it had been there before we even noticed it. My sister and I never saw it approach. We just happened to finally notice those bright eyes staring right at us. We were simply just awestruck and totally captivated by the proximity and complete attention it gave us. The fear didn't settle in until much later, when the lack of self-preservation was long outgrown. I'm telling you that at my grown age now, I scream when a chicken or turkey flutters its wings close to me. I scream when I see a lizard. Yeah, that's me in the lake, facing what definitely was a predator in its natural habitat. I would be embarrassed to see me now, screaming because a hen got too close. It had her face from Snow Squirrel. I'm transcribing this for my friend Sus. He gave me permission to transcribe his encounter for him. Sus lives in a small town in Arkansas, population of 800. A town in the foothills where everybody knows everybody and all the stores are closed by 5 p.m. Old-timey vibe and all. On this day it was foggy in the sleepy little town, and he was out on the porch starting to light the grill to make lunch. To give you an idea of the layout, there is a levee just to the side of the porch leading up to the man-made fish pond, then into the forest. He's watching the coals when he hears rustling from the woods. He didn't give it much thought until he heard his cousin's voice. "Hey, come help me cut this tree." He found that odd, because he and his cousin had already cut down the tree the day before, and his cousin was inside at the moment spending time with his girlfriend. Sus hears the rustling again, and the voice repeats itself. The same inflection, the same tone, the same way his cousin had said it yesterday. A slight crackle, as if being played on a phonograph. He covers the grill as the rustling comes close enough for him to see the bushes move. This seems like a good time to go inside and try to forget the entire thing. A few hours later, I get home from work, and we join the chat room. He invites me to a side channel to tell me what he's seen, and we start to joke that he should tell his cousin. Debating whether he should tell him the creepy part, or simply play it off as someone having recorded his voice the day before, to lure Sus into the woods for who knows what reason. We settled that it would cause one of two reactions. Either his cousin was going to call him crazy, or he would go looking for the possible creeper. But we thought it would be funny if his tight-laced cousin saw something creepy. After a few minutes, he says he needs to get up because his cousin said that he had seen their kitten, Little Miss, outside when he came in. For some background on the small heathen, she was found in those woods when she was just a tiny little kitten and is still in many ways feral. So she escapes the house often, but also comes when he calls her. So it would not be that hard to get her to come inside. Sus was gone for 5 minutes before coming back with a simple statement. It had her face. He seemed shaken as he spoke, his voice wavering slightly as he recounted what had happened. I went outside to get her, and I called her name. It came out of the woods, and I thought it was her, until I turned my head and saw that she was still inside. She was in the window watching us. My cousin had said he saw her out there, but when I looked back, its head, it was upside down as it ran back into the woods. It looked just like her. He seemed shaken. The jovial air he normally has when we joke about cryptids was set aside. He is the one who cheered me up with the statement "skin diddly" when they would circle my old home in the mountains. I knew he had truly seen it, as he told me that even his aunt seemed shocked when he came back inside, looking like he had seen a ghost. He did not tell her what he saw. He simply told her not to go outside. His older cat, Ginger, was growling at the bedroom windows. I do hope he never meets this creature again, and that if he does, that it is not wearing Little Miss's face. UFO over the bayou, from Troy from Texas. It was the summer of 1976 in the sleepy little town of Angleton, Texas. My family lived in a small house just off Highway 288 in Brazoria County. We lived at the end of a cutoff next to a bayou. I was a young boy of almost 10 and enjoying the late nights of summer. It was typically hot for our area, and not having AC, we had the windows open. I was asleep. However, I found myself dreaming and could clearly see myself as if looking at my room like a movie screen. As I watched myself, you could hear the crickets and frogs chirping in the night. Soon, a big wind picked up, and all the animals were silent. Now I sat up, and now I am looking through my eyes like normal. I walk from my bedroom and out the back door of the kitchen. Our house was roughly 150 yards away from the bayou, about 20 yards from the house in the backyard, was a grove of trees. My brother and I had built a large tree fort in it. I started to walk toward the bayou and was just under the tree fort when the wind picked up in a very severe gust. Just then, a bright light appeared above the trees in the tree fort. It went out, and the wind died off as well. Everything was silent. You could make out a shape moving above the trees. It was probably 100 feet in the air or so, kind of long and cigar-shaped. It moved out over the bayou, and I found myself standing under a garfish stand at the bank. The object was almost invisible, as it was dark and silhouetted with the dark tree line. Suddenly, a red beam of light shone down from the object. It was followed by a green beam, and then a yellow beam. The light beams moved in a triangular rotation and soon went out. My eyes were momentarily blinded by the brightness, and it took a minute to see in the dark again. The object had moved up the bayou several hundred yards and repeated the procedure. I watched as it slowly moved up the bayou until it was gone from sight. I was startled by the re-engaging of the frogs and crickets. I turned to go to the house, and that's when I sat up in my bed. I thought, wow, what a cool, crazy dream. I decided to use the restroom, as I was now wide awake. I moved off the covers and discovered my feet were covered in wet grass and mud. That was when it hit me, and I was shook to my core. No way would I have ventured into the woods in the dark where I lived. Too many cottonmouths and rattlesnakes. I was bothered by this, and then, to my horror, other people reported seeing bright lights in the Texas skies that night as well. Anyway, I'm glad to have experienced it. Possible skinwalker sighting. From Anonymous. One day when school was out, my friend and I stayed after for a football game. This happened a few years ago, so I don't completely remember the details, but I remember how scary it was. So we stayed at the football game for about 30 to 40 minutes, I'd say, until we decided to leave. Where my school is, it's surrounded by woods. We started walking up a street, figuring out what we wanted to go to when we remembered our friend once showed us a path through the woods to get into town. We decided to go through the woods and go to a nearby gas station to get some snacks and sit down. Once we got to the entrance of the woods, the grass was way more overgrown than we remembered, but we still chose to go anyway. As we got deeper into the woods, I felt as if I was being watched, and overall had chills. I get creeped out easily, and it was starting to get dark out, which definitely made it worse. We ended up getting lost in a pretty open area where it was just a lot of mud everywhere, and there was no more path. We stopped for a second to catch our breath and turn around. I noticed the whole forest was quiet, not even a sound from a cricket. Pure silence. This made me really confused, because it was probably about time for them to come out, but there was just nothing. My friend points out a smell in the woods that is just odd. The only way I could describe it would be like hard-boiled eggs and a dead animal that has been sitting on the side of the road. I mentioned feeling watched, and he told me he felt the same. Now we were both completely freaked out and decided to book it out the way we came. My phone was dead, so I called my mom on his phone to tell her we needed to be picked up while out of breath. She was confused why I was so panicked at the time, so I told her, "It's a long story and I'll tell you when we get in the car," then hung up. My mom wasn't too far when we got out. She was parked in someone's driveway to get us. She pulled out, and we were telling her what happened in the woods while driving past, when we saw some black figure, at least 6 feet tall, trying to hide behind a tree. Once we noticed it, the figure disappeared. The Shadow in the Woods. From Amatsubu. It started as a spontaneous camping trip, the kind born out of boredom and a group chat filled with half-serious suggestions. There were 5 of us. Me, my best friend Danny, his girlfriend Clara, and 2 other friends, Mark and Steph. We decided on a spot deep in the woods, far from the noise of the city, a place Danny swore was perfect for stargazing. By the time we parked the car and hiked to the clearing, the sun was already dipping below the tree line. The first few hours were idyllic. We pitched our tents, built a fire, and laughed as Danny struggled to roast marshmallows without burning them. The night sky was breathtaking, the stars more vivid than I'd ever seen. Clara played soft tunes on her guitar, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. It was around midnight when things took a turn. Mark had wandered off to gather more firewood, and when he returned, he looked pale and uneasy. "There's something weird out there," he said, dumping the wood into a pile. "Thought I saw someone standing between the trees." We laughed it off, teasing him about watching too many horror movies. But Mark wasn't joking. His eyes darted back toward the forest, scanning the shadows. "I'm serious," he insisted. "It was tall, like too tall to be a person." Steph rolled her eyes, trying to lighten the mood. "Maybe Bigfoot's out for a stroll," she quipped, but the tension lingered. Mark was rarely rattled, and his unease had a way of seeping into the group. The fire crackled as silence settled over us. Then came the sound, a low, guttural groan that seemed to echo through the trees. We all froze, exchanging nervous glances. "Probably just an animal," Danny said, though his voice wavered. "What kind of animal makes that noise?" Clara whispered. We listened, but the forest had gone eerily quiet. Even the usual chorus of crickets was absent. I told myself it was nothing, just the natural sounds of the wild. But deep down, I felt the first pangs of fear. As the night wore on, we tried to shake off the unease. Danny told a story about his childhood to distract us, and for a while, it worked. But then Steph stood up abruptly. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Hear what?" I asked. "Footsteps," she said, pointing toward the trees. We all turned, straining our ears. At first, there was nothing. Then, faint but unmistakable, the sound of leaves crunching underfoot reached us. The steps were slow, deliberate, and too heavy to belong to any small animal. Danny grabbed the flashlight and shone it into the forest. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing only trees and undergrowth. "Hello?" he called. No response. Clara grabbed my arm. "Maybe we should go back to the car," she murmured. I nodded, but Danny shook his head. "It's probably just some hiker messing with us," he said. "We'll be fine." Then we saw it. A figure emerged from the shadows, just beyond the reach of the flashlight. It was tall, unnaturally so, its limbs elongated and bent at odd angles. Its skin was pale and almost translucent, and its face. I'll never forget its face. It had hollow eyes and a gaping mouth that seemed to stretch far wider than it should. For a moment, none of us moved, frozen in place as it stared at us. Then it stepped forward. "Run!" Mark shouted, breaking the spell. We scrambled, grabbing what we could and bolting toward the trail. The creature's footsteps were loud, almost deafening, as it pursued us. I didn't dare look back. When we reached the car, Danny fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking. We piled in, slamming the doors as the creature appeared at the edge of the clearing. Its hollow eyes seemed to follow us as we sped away, disappearing into the night. None of us spoke on the drive back. The laughter and camaraderie of earlier were gone, replaced by a suffocating silence. We never spoke about that night again. The creature, whatever it was, remains a mystery. but I haven't been camping since, and I don't think I ever will. A chilling camping experience in Texas. From Madero. As an avid outdoorsman, I try to go camping at least once a year. Living in Texas, I found a hidden gem next to a river surrounded by a vast canyon. The solitude and tranquility of the wilderness beckon me, and I crave the escape from city life. For my latest adventure, I invited 3 friends, Brian, Luke, and Eduardo. Brian, not a fan of the outdoors or cold, resisted initially. "Why do we have to go camping?" he complained. "It's freezing and I hate sleeping on the ground." But Luke and Eduardo were enthusiastic, and I convinced Brian to join us. We booked the campsite in December, which proved to be one of the coldest days in 2021. The forecast predicted temperatures in the mid-40s, unusually chilly for Texas. After picking up my friends, we embarked on the 3-hour drive to the ranch. As we arrived at the ranch, the gate was closed, and we thought our trip was ruined. "Seriously?" Brian muttered. "We drove all this way for nothing?" But I called the owner, who reassured me that he had left a key under a rock next to the gate. "Welcome to the ranch," the owner said over the phone. "You're the only ones booked for tonight. Make yourselves at home." We exchanged skeptical glances, but retrieved the key and entered the property. The campsite was picturesque, nestled beside the river, surrounded by towering trees in the vast canyon. We quickly set up our single tent, started a fire, and explored the area. The cold air invigorated us as we walked along the riverbank, taking in the serene beauty. As night fell, we marveled at the full moon and starry sky. We shared stories, drank whiskey, and enjoyed the peaceful atmosphere. Later, we ventured to collect firewood, laughing and joking along the way. "Hey, Brian, look, a rabbit!" Luke teased, pointing to a small creature darting across our path. "Shut up, Luke," Brian retorted. "I'm trying to enjoy the peace." During our return, we heard a deer's distress call, followed by an unsettling, muffled scream. We exchanged uneasy glances, sensing something was amiss. "What was that?" Eduardo whispered. "Probably just a coyote," I reassured him, though my voice lacked conviction. Halfway back to camp, heavy footsteps echoed through the woods, making us quicken our pace. "This isn't funny anymore," Brian said, his voice tinged with concern. "Let's just get back to camp," I urged. Back at camp, we tried to shake off the feeling, but I couldn't shake the sense of being watched. I turned off the music, and we fell silent. "Guys, listen," I whispered. Heavy footsteps stopped behind us, replaced by labored breathing. I grabbed my axe, and whatever was out there fled into the darkness. "What the?" Luke breathed. "We need to stay calm," I cautioned. Shaken, we decided to face the direction of the sound, listening intently for the next hour. The silence was oppressive, punctuated only by the crackling fire. Before retiring to our tent, we agreed to stay vigilant. "Keep your phones close," I reminded them. Later, my friend woke me, signaling to listen. Footsteps and snuffling sounds surrounded our tent, followed by a low, menacing growl, unlike any mountain lion's. "What is that?" Eduardo whispered. I shook my head. The creature vanished into the woods. In the morning, we discovered large paw prints and broken branches. Though we never identified the creature, we were grateful nothing worse happened. As we packed up to leave, Brian turned to us and said, "I don't care what it was. I'm never camping again." We laughed, still shaken but relieved. "We haven't seen the last of that place," I said, gazing out at the canyon. "We'll return," Luke agreed. "The mystery of that night remains unsolved." The Creep Beneath the Canopy, from Lillian. This story all started when my best friend and I, who we'll call Tatiana, decided to go camping for a fun night out. We both have been having a rough start to the summer, so we decided that we should go camping as a way to escape for a few days. We found a nice wooded area and planned to set up there. We were planning on staying from July 21st to July 26th. So when that time came, I picked up Tatiana, and we went to pick up some snacks for the drive. When we were back on the road, we were chatting about our week and things, just catching up since we haven't seen each other in a month and haven't had the time to text each other daily. Finally, an hour and 45 minutes later, we were at the woods where we planned to stay. It was around 4:15 when we started hiking in. We wanted to be far away from civilization, so we hiked pretty far and went quite deep into the woods. It was 6 o'clock when we finally made it to a good area. We quickly set up the tents so we could have fun before dusk. We decided to go to the lake, which was a 25-minute walk from where we set up. We wanted to swim since it was 70 degrees out. We were having a blast. There were many other people as well, so we felt relatively safe. This decision would quickly take a turn for the worse. There was an older man, most likely in his mid-50s, early 60s, that came up to Tatiana and I trying to hit on us. We tried to move away since we were quite uncomfortable with him around us because it seemed like he wasn't happy with our rejection of him. He was getting mad at us but soon left us alone. That seemed to be the end of it, but we just couldn't enjoy being at the lake anymore, so we went back to camp. It was probably 8 p.m. now, and growing dark out when we decided to start a small fire. We made sure that nothing else caught fire. We cooked up some dinner and soon after, made some s'mores, and told scary stories around the fire. It was around 10 p.m. when we heard footsteps circling our camp, just barely out of the firelight. We knew better than to think those footsteps were animal, since they were clear as day. Human footsteps. We quickly went into our tents, and I called my boyfriend and the police. We didn't care about what anybody else thought. All we knew is that it may have been the same guy from earlier, and we sure didn't want them there, in front of our tents. My boyfriend and the police arrived a little while later, but the guy was gone by that time. Tatiana and I packed up our things and left. We were disappointed that our trip didn't even last one night, but we'd rather have our trip cut short than possibly our lives. My boyfriend drove us home, and we haven't really gone camping since, scared something similar will happen. The next day, I told my boyfriend what happened at the lake previously, and he too suspected it was the same guy. We can't be 100% sure, but there is a high chance that it was him. I'm honestly not thinking about going camping anytime soon because of this. I hope we don't meet ever again. Still waiting. From Urban Witch 393. Hi, my name is Iwa, and I'm from Eastern Europe. I've been following this podcast for quite some time now, and decided it's time to share a story of my own. My encounter happened when I was around 5 or 6 years old, since I remember I wasn't in school yet, and it was a warm and wet September morning in the mid-2000s. The previous evening, almost my entire family consisting of my parents, my mom's sisters and brothers, arrived at my grandma's summer house. It was a small wood cabin, built by my great-grandfather, a good 80 years earlier, and had seen many renovations. Despite the attempts, its prime was definitely behind it, and it was far too small for 8 people. It was my favorite place in the world, regardless. A bit of backstory is needed for you to fully understand the event that happened to me. I was a curious child, with a big imagination. When other kids had tea parties and played war, I'd go into the forest looking for dragon nests and fairies. And because of that, my grandpa became my favorite person. He was an engineer during work hours, but to me, he might as well have been Tolkien himself. Telling me stories about numerous fantastical creatures was his favorite after-dinner activity. When I'd ask my mom if she thought that gnomes could be living in the forest near the house, she'd say, "Could be, but we can't know for sure, honey." When I relayed my mom's words to Grandpa, the same day after lunch, he'd take me into the forest for a stroll, and we would stumble upon a few twigs and leaves, neatly propped on a mushroom or in a hollow in the tree, which was the undisputable proof, right? So you better believe me that Grandpa's word was law, and nothing less. As I got older, I came to find out that Grandpa would either tell my dad or my uncle to make one, or he'd do one himself on his way back from work. For a stranger just wandering the forest, the sight of a man in his mid-60s, in a formal shirt and tie, making little twig constructions in the middle of nowhere, would be peculiar to say the least. But he would do it for me, and I will always be grateful for it. His favorite story to tell me was about Kivacek. If those of you who are interested in Slavic mythology have never heard of it, it's because Grandpa made it up. The story was at least 40 years old, and my mom, aunts, and uncle all heard it in their youth. Grandpa used to say that he'd share his lunch with the creature, so that my mom would make him an extra sandwich or two. Very clever of Grandpa, if you ask me. Kivacek supposedly lived in thick and high foliage at the riverbank, in a house he'd woven himself from river grass. The river was about 15 minutes away from the summer house, and the path leading to it was pretty straightforward, through the forest beginning just behind the house. Despite being an engineer, I don't think my grandpa could pull off making an entire house made of those things, so he gave various excuses on why we couldn't go there and meet it. And this is where my encounter begins. The day after we arrived, I was awoken by my mom calling me in for breakfast. Since mushroom picking is most often done in the early morning, it was still dark outside when we ate and got dressed for the task. We headed out, with Grandma leading the way, since she knew the best spots in the forest. I was somewhere in the middle of the group, between my aunts and Dad with my uncle. The forest was pretty misty during that time of the day. Not as thick as the mist on the fields, which hung low and dense, but it still obscured the vision. As we moved deeper into the forest, I grew bored and restless, likely due to the fact that looking for barely visible mushrooms under a thick layer of moss wasn't the most fascinating task for a 5-year-old, or my ADHD that was yet to be diagnosed. Either way, my legs were itching for adventure, and my brain was looking for opportunities to slip out from under the watchful eye of the adults. So when my chance came, I took it without a second thought and tiptoed away into the mist. I headed for the riverbank. Maybe, just maybe, I could find Kivacek, or at least his house. If my grandpa refused to take me there, I'd get there on my own and see for myself. Unfortunately, I vastly underestimated my knowledge of the forest's layout, and before long I got lost. No river or my parents in sight, I began to panic. I started running around, desperately looking for something I recognized. A tree trunk, big boulder, something that could help me find my way home. When it didn't happen, I did the only logical thing I could think of. I sat under a tree and began crying. I must have sat there for a few hours at least, because the sun had risen high and the fog slowly disappeared. At that point, I'd lost all hope of making it home. Dramatic, I know, given the forest wasn't a particularly big one, but I was a scared child, and for me, everything was far more frightening than it actually was. Suddenly I heard a frail, quiet, "Hello." I almost tipped over from the scare. I looked in that direction, and I saw an old woman standing there, Her face was all wrinkled. Gray, almost white hair slipped out from under the colorful head cover. If you Google the phrase Slavic grandma, you will get a general picture of what she looked like. I must have been crying so loud I hadn't heard her walk up to me, I told myself. She made a step towards me and spoke in that same old, frail voice. "Hello, dearie, you're lost, aren't you?" I nodded to that, still shocked by the encounter. The old lady gave me a soft smile and asked, "What's your name?" Iwa, I answered, my voice shaking. I didn't like the situation one bit, even though the lady gave off a maternal vibe that made me feel somewhat safe. "Oh, Ewa, I almost didn't recognize you in this dress. You live with your parents at the edge of the woods, right?" I nodded again. I didn't know who she thought I was, but if she was going to get me back home, I'd let her think whatever she wanted. Her smile widened at my reply. She gently took my hand and pulled me to my feet. She cleaned the dirt off my clothes and began leading me through the woods. I had no idea where she was leading me, but at that moment, it was better than sitting under a tree, lost and crying. "You know," the woman started, her voice somehow full of longing, "my son and 2 grandsons should be back soon. We live by the river. You should visit us. The boys will be very happy to have someone to play with. We don't have many neighbors nearby." I nodded, not wanting to upset her. In the short time we walked, she talked about her son and grandsons in great detail, as old people sometimes do. Her monologue came to a stop the moment we stepped outside the woods. From that point, I could easily see my grandma's house. I turned around to thank her, because my mom always told me to be polite and show my gratitude when someone did something for me. But there was no one there. Nowhere in the woods could I see the woman's colorful head cover, so in my joy of being found, I didn't give it half a thought and sprinted back to the house. There I was met with a sight of panicking adults who were as happy as I was when I came through the door. When my mom asked what happened to me, I explained that I wandered off to see Kivacek. This earned my grandpa a nasty side-eye from both my mom and grandma, and a big scolding once I was out of earshot, with many curse words involved, I suspect. At the description of the old lady that helped me, adults got weirdly quiet. "Well," Grandma said, probably mentally looking for a way to end the conversation, "must have been one of our neighbors then." "Yeah, a neighbor," scoffed my Aunt Maya, which caused the second side-eye of the morning. I didn't understand her reaction back then and was too exhausted to question it, so I let it be. That was almost 20 years ago, and we recently had another mushroom-picking family gathering. When we sat down to have dinner, and my wandering off all those years ago was brought up. Psh, she wasn't lucky to find her way back. She was lucky that Wanda found her. As it turns out, my aunt also met the woman that led me out of the forest. Aunt Maya used to pick berries in her early years, and happened to lose her way home one of those times. The fog was also thick as the day I got lost. The very same old woman, Wanda, found my aunt and led her out of the forest, also disappearing at the edge of the woods. Now I was intrigued and felt validated that the old babushka wasn't only a figment of my imagination. As it turned out, Wanda was a woman that used to live in the forest around the 1940s, with her son and 2 grandsons, since her daughter-in-law died during childbirth, and Wanda helped in raising the boys. During the Second World War, her son and grandsons were drafted into the army, and according to the village tale, died not soon after. Everyone knew, but no one told Wanda. According to what my grandmother once heard from her mother, hope of reuniting with her family was the only thing that kept old Wanda going. So when the news came, nobody had the heart to break it to her. She knew my grandmother from weekly mass at the local church, and since I share a name with her, This is where the confusion must have come from. She died a year after her family, during a particularly harsh winter. Since that time, her cottage had fallen into ruin and was swallowed by the forest. Her ghost, however, seems to be still wandering the forest, still waiting for her family to come back. So that's my theory. She wanted so very badly to be reunited with her family, so she helps those who can't find their way back to theirs. This would be the end of this story. I have many more, but I felt like this one was special and good to share with you all first. While listening to this podcast, I've come to know many stories where the entities and creatures pose danger and cause distress to those who encounter them. I wanted to give you a different perspective, that some entities can be benevolent and good, and not everything we don't understand must be evil and potentially harmful. Skinwalker Story from Ich. Hello, I had a very strange encounter when backpacking in southeast Colorado. Me, my girlfriend, my sister, and her boyfriend, as well as my German Shepherd, wanted to enjoy one of our huge national parks. We decided to go backpacking and camping for a few days. We had 3 guns with us, a hunting rifle, and 2 handguns for protection. We planned to fish for most of our meals and didn't bring all that much extra food. The first 2 days, nothing noteworthy happened, except for once, I woke up to absolute silence. No natural sounds, no rustling, nothing. On the 3rd day, however, something very weird happened. Before I say anything, I want to mention that none of us drink, smoke, take any drugs or medications. Leon and I went to get some more firewood, so we left the girls with one of the handguns. It was starting to get dark, so we were moving with a purpose. All went smoothly, and we returned in short order with our arms full of firewood. We were gone for maybe 25 minutes, but when we returned, the girls were absolutely terrified. My girlfriend was crying, and my sister was on the verge of tears. We tried to calm them down, but they were frantic. We tried asking them what happened, and only after an hour, my girlfriend finally opened up and told us what had happened. She said that maybe 5 minutes after we left, a dark figure came out of the woods, the opposite direction of the way we left. It was about 9 feet tall, had parts of its flesh hanging out, was impossibly skinny, and looked very strong. It sounded like me, and told them that Leon was attacked by a wild bear, and that they needed to come with it and help. They said that it kept begging for help, and that it sat down at the edge of the tree line. It stayed there until right before we came back, and the figure just seemingly disappeared. Leon and I discussed what to do, and came to the conclusion that we would spend the night here, and alternate keeping watch, prepare some extra food, and the next day we would take the shortest path to our car. But regardless, we would end up spending one more night out here, because it was too far to travel in one day. There wasn't much else we could do, as there was no cell service or means of contacting anyone this far out. Throughout the night, there always was this metallic, coppery smell, and a pervasive feeling of being watched. Other than that, we didn't see or hear anything else. The natural sounds of the forest were also gone, and stayed gone till the end of the trip. The next morning, we started packing up camp and began the long hike back. We set up camp that evening slightly before dusk. After not seeing anyone the entire day, a thought crossed my mind. This was supposed to be a very popular area, one of the most talked about hiking and camping places around us. But yet we never saw one single person, not one the entire time we'd been here. We ate our pre-cooked food from the night before, and Leon and my sister went to sleep. After 3 hours, I woke Leon up, and I went to sleep. Somewhere around the early hours of dark, we were woken up by hurried, hushed tones. Leon and my sister looked concerned and terrified. They whispered to us that the thing was here again, and that we needed to leave now. We left everything behind and ran silently through the night, constantly on edge with our guns at the ready. We could hear something following us and crashing through the trees. We just needed to push a little longer. Hard when there is something stalking you through the forest at night. Suddenly, we heard whistling, and it kept getting louder and louder as our jogging turned into a near sprint. Then, out of the thin air, there evolved a deafening, deep roar, which slowly turned into a high-pitched scream. We tried to ignore it as best as we could and continue on. After hours of exhausting running through the dark, getting poked and whipped by branches and bushes, we saw it. The lights of the parking lot. We got into our car and sped out of there, never looking back. I didn't tell anyone else what happened, as I was sure that they would think I'm crazy. But I know what I saw, and I know everyone with me saw it too. I will never go into any of our national parks again. Attacked while hiking, from Spoopy. The woods were always a place of solace for me, a sanctuary where I could escape the relentless pace of modern life and find peace in nature. But on this day, the forest had a different kind of message for me, a message written in the language of fear. I'd been hiking for hours, lost in a daydream as I followed the winding trail. The world blurred around me, the sights and sounds melting into a soothing haze. But the gentle hum of the forest shattered when a rustling in the underbrush made me spin around. My heart leapt into my throat as I locked eyes with a pair of glowing yellow orbs. They belonged to a creature I could only describe as a nightmare. It crouched in the shadows, its skeletal frame coated in a luminous slime that made it appear otherworldly. A low, guttural growl rumbled from its chest. It wasn't a sound of hunger, I realized with a chill. It was a sound of anticipation, of the hunt. Fear gripped me like a vice, but I forced myself to move, to run. My legs felt like lead, but I pushed myself harder, the forest closing in around me. It was gaining. I could feel it. Its hot breath washed over me, a fetid mixture of rot and death. I stumbled and crashed through the underbrush, my mind a whirlwind of panic. But there was nowhere to hide, nowhere to escape to. The forest was a maze, and I was its latest lost soul. With a roar that seemed to shake the very earth, the creature sprang. Its claws raked across my back, tearing through my skin like paper. I screamed, but the sound was drowned out by the deafening cacophony of my own pounding heart. As darkness claimed me, I had one final thought. This wasn't just a hiking trip gone wrong. This was something else entirely. Something ancient and primal and very, very wrong. And then came the pain. It was like being set on fire from the inside out. Each breath was agony, each twitch of muscle a torment. I was trapped in my own body, helpless as it was torn apart. The forest seemed to spin around me. The world tilted sickeningly. I clawed at myself, desperate for relief, but my fingers found only slick, glistening flesh. My mind spun, the horror of the situation finally sinking in. I was the prey. The world swirled around me, the pain a constant, blinding inferno, and then miraculously, it began to fade, slowly at first, then faster. The forest stilled, the screams in my head finally silencing. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in the forest. I was in a small, sterile room, hooked up to machines that monitored my vital signs. I was alive, barely. Days passed in a haze of confusion and fear. I had no memory of being rescued, no idea how long I had been found. The world beyond my hospital room was a blur, a parade of concerned faces and hushed whispers. I learned eventually that I had been missing for 3 days. 3 long, terrifying days lost in the depths of the forest. That I had been found mangled and near death, my body ravaged by what they said was a bear. The stories of the woods, the legends of the thing they called the Wendigo, I believe are true. The beast had claimed another victim, and I was one of the lucky ones. In the weeks that followed, I was haunted by nightmares of those glowing eyes, that guttural growl, the taste of fear that had become a part of me. I struggled to find peace, to move on, but the forest had left its mark. I learned to live with the scars, both visible and invisible. I learned to find solace in the same woods that had once brought me peace, now tinged with a newfound respect and fear. The hiking trails I once followed with careless abandon were now mapped with military precision, each landmark a potential hiding place, each rustle in the underbrush a threat. Life went on, but a part of me remains forever changed. The woods are no longer a sanctuary, but a battlefield. And I am a warrior, scarred but not broken, carrying the weight of my encounter with true evil into every step of my new life. We should have cut the trip short. From Anonymous. In the summer of 2015, when I was 19 years old, my boyfriend, who we'll call John, and I decided to go camping. We were excited to take a break from our busy college lives and spend some time in nature. John had managed to borrow his dad's RV, which meant we could enjoy the outdoors without having to deal with the usual camping inconveniences like bugs. For me, this was a big relief because mosquitoes love me, and being covered in bites would have made the trip miserable. We set off on a Friday afternoon, driving a few hours away to a secluded forested area. The drive was uneventful, and we stopped at a small diner along the way for a quick meal. There was something about the vibe of the diner that felt off, though. It was quiet, and a few locals gave us strange looks when we mentioned where we were headed. One older man even warned us, saying, "Be careful out there. Strange things happen in those woods." We chalked it up to small-town superstitions and didn't think much more about it. We arrived at our destination just before sunset. The spot we chose was near a river, with plenty of trees for shade and privacy. It was picturesque, the kind of place that feels like it's straight out of a travel brochure. We set up our campfire and enjoyed the evening making s'mores and talking about anything and everything. When the night deepened, we retreated to the RV, looking forward to a peaceful night's sleep. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to a noise outside. It sounded like something moving around, shuffling through the brush and occasionally knocking against the RV. I stayed quiet, my heart pounding, and glanced over at John, who was still sound asleep. I debated waking him up, but decided to check the RV's built-in camera system first. The small screen lit up, and as I cycled through the views, my stomach dropped. On the screen, I saw a large, shadowy figure near the edge of the river. It was hard to make out details, but it was definitely not a person. It moved on all fours but then stood upright, its movements deliberate and predatory. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen, even as a cold sweat started to form on my skin. I finally nudged John awake, whispering for him to be quiet. When he saw the screen, his expression turned serious. "Stay still," he said. "Don't make a sound." We watched as the creature sniffed around the campsite, occasionally pausing as if it had caught a scent. It was massive, easily larger than any animal I'd ever seen in person, with an unnatural way of moving that sent chills down my spine. At one point, it let out a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the RV walls. I wanted to believe it was just a bear, but something about its shape and behavior didn't fit. After what felt like hours, The creature finally wandered off toward the woods. Even after it was gone, we stayed frozen in place, too scared to move. Neither of us got much sleep that night. The next morning, we cautiously stepped outside to look for signs of what had visited us. The ground near the riverbank had deep impressions, almost like paw prints, but much larger than any we'd seen before. There were broken branches and disturbed foliage, clear evidence that something heavy had been moving through the area. John muttered something about it being a huge animal, but neither of us could say for sure what it was. We spent the rest of the day close to the RV, trying to shake off the unease from the night before. John suggested we cut the trip short, but I stubbornly insisted on staying one more night. I didn't want to let fear ruin the experience. We agreed to be more cautious, and John even set up some makeshift noise traps around the campsite, a few metal cans and fishing line, just in case something came back. That evening, we stayed inside the RV after sunset, not wanting to risk being caught outside. Around the same time as the previous night, the noise traps went off. The clattering sound was loud and sudden, making my heart leap into my throat. John grabbed a flashlight and one of the rifles his dad had insisted we bring, while I checked the cameras again. This time the creature was closer. The flashlight beam caught its silhouette, revealing more details. It was hunched over, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. Its fur was patchy, and its head was almost wolf-like but distorted, as if something had gone wrong in its creation. Its glowing eyes reflected the light, piercing through the darkness and locking onto the RV. John lowered his voice to a whisper. "We're staying in here. Don't move. Don't make a sound." We sat in silence, the tension so thick it felt like the air had been sucked out of the RV. The creature paced around, occasionally sniffing the air and letting out low growls. At one point, it got close enough that we could hear its heavy breathing. I clutched John's arm, trying to stay calm, but every second felt like an eternity. Finally, after what felt like hours, the creature turned and loped back into the woods. We waited until sunrise before stepping outside again. The noise traps had been completely destroyed, and there were fresh tracks leading back toward the forest. John didn't say much, but I could tell he was just as shaken as I was. We packed up our things and left that morning. The drive back was quiet, both of us lost in our thoughts. I kept replaying the events in my head, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. Was it some kind of mutated animal? A predator we didn't know existed? I had no answers, only questions that haunted me long after we returned home. Since that trip, I've avoided camping in remote areas. I still love nature, but the idea of being so isolated, so vulnerable, terrifies me now. Whatever was out there that night, it wasn't something I ever want to encounter again. John and I eventually went our separate ways, but we never stopped talking about what happened on that trip. It's a memory that's burned into both of our minds, a reminder that there are still things in this world we can't explain. Strange Lights in the Sky, from Weekend Warrior. It was a summer evening, around 7:30 p.m., when my friend, let's call him C, and I decided to head out to the woods near my house. We both enjoyed spending time there, building makeshift shelters, climbing trees, and just exploring. The woods weren't anything extraordinary, just a patch of dense trees and underbrush with a few trails winding through. But it was our go-to spot for hanging out. The sun was low in the sky, and the woods were bathed in that golden light you only get at dusk. It was quiet except for the occasional rustle of leaves and chirping of crickets. We weren't doing anything particularly interesting that evening, just walking one of the longer trails and talking about random stuff. C had brought his small hatchet. He always liked to chop at fallen branches as we walked, and I had a flashlight in my pocket, though it wasn't dark enough to need it yet. As we were walking, I suddenly noticed a bright light cast over the trail in front of us. At first, I thought it might be a car. There were dirt roads that ran near the edge of the woods, but the light was too high up, coming at an angle that didn't make sense. It was bright enough to cast long shadows of the trees around us, and for a second, we just stood there, frozen. "What the hell is that?" C asked, his voice low. I turned to look behind us, and he did the same. Above the treetops, there was a beam of light angled down toward the ground. It was stark white, not like the warm yellow you'd expect from a streetlight or the harsh glare of a car headlight. The source of the light was moving, slow and deliberate. My first thought was that it had to be a helicopter. It made sense with how high up it seemed and the way it was illuminating such a large area. But there was no sound. No thumping of rotors, no hum of an engine, nothing. It was completely silent. "You think it's a drone?" I whispered, though I didn't believe it even as I said it. C shook his head. "Too big," he replied, "and it's way too quiet." We watched as the light moved slowly up and to the left, tracing over the tops of the trees. It wasn't jerky like a spotlight being waved around. It was smooth, almost like it was following some invisible track in the air. C and I just stood there, staring, not sure what to do or say. I could feel my heartbeat picking up, that uneasy feeling creeping in when you know something isn't right, but you can't figure out what. After a few seconds, the light started to dim, fading gradually until it disappeared completely. Whatever had been casting it was gone, leaving us standing in the growing darkness of the woods. "That wasn't normal," I said finally, breaking the silence. C nodded, his jaw tight. "No kidding. What the hell was it?" We stayed there for a few minutes, scanning the sky and listening for any sound. Nothing. The woods were back to their usual quiet, as if nothing had happened. But the unease lingered. I've seen planes and helicopters fly overhead plenty of times, and they're always loud even at a distance. This was different. It wasn't just the silence that threw me off. It was the way the light moved, so deliberate and smooth. It felt intentional somehow. C suggested we head back to the house. Neither of us said it out loud, but I think we were both a little freaked out. The walk back was tense. Every sound in the woods, the rustle of leaves, the distant croak of a frog, made us jump. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the light again, but the sky stayed dark. When we got back to my house, we sat on the back porch for a while, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. C kept bringing up possibilities. A helicopter with some kind of weird new tech, a drone bigger than anything we'd ever seen. But none of it felt right. I pulled out my phone and started searching online, looking for reports of strange lights or military exercises in the area. But I didn't find anything that matched what we'd seen. "Maybe we should tell someone," C said after a while. "Like who?" I asked. "The cops? What are we supposed to say? Hey, we saw a weird light in the woods." He shrugged, but he didn't push it. We both knew it would sound ridiculous. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I kept going over it in my head, trying to piece together what it could have been. The silence, the way it moved, the brightness of the light. None of it added up. I even went back to the woods once on my own, during the day, to see if there was anything unusual where the light had been. Nothing. Just trees and underbrush, the same as always. C and I talked about it a few more times, but eventually we stopped bringing it up. It's not that we forgot about it. It's just that there wasn't anything else to say. It was an experience without an explanation, and trying to make sense of it only made it more frustrating. Even now, years later, I still think about that night. I've heard all kinds of theories about strange lights, UFOs, experimental aircraft, natural phenomena. But none of them feel like they fit. I've never seen anything like it again, and part of me hopes I never do. Whatever it was, it didn't feel like it belonged. It felt like something we weren't supposed to see. I don't walk the woods at night anymore. From Sipo88. This story happened a few years ago, when I was about 17. I've always had a habit of walking in the woods near my house, especially at night. It started as a way to clear my head. I've dealt with anxiety for as long as I can remember, and something about the solitude of the forest, with its stillness and faint rustling leaves, helped calm me. Everyone always told me not to go into the woods after dark. There were stories, nothing too detailed, just vague warnings about strange things that could happen. I never put much stock in them. I figured they were just the usual small-town rumors designed to keep kids out of trouble. I'd been walking those trails for years and had never seen anything unusual. Until that night. It was late autumn, the kind of night where the air is sharp and cold, and the moonlight filters through the bare branches, casting pale, shifting patterns on the ground. I'd left my house around 11 p.m., bundled up against the chill, and wandered into the woods at the edge of our property. The trail there wasn't much of a trail anymore, overgrown with weeds and partially blocked by fallen branches. But I knew the path well enough to navigate it even in the dark. I had been walking for maybe 20 minutes when I started to feel uneasy. It was subtle at first, a sense that something wasn't quite right. The forest was too quiet. Normally, you'd hear the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustling of small animals moving through the underbrush. But that night, there was nothing. Just the sound of my own breathing and the crunch of leaves under my boots. I paused, shining my flashlight around. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing only trees and shadows. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the silence was just the natural stillness of the woods in late fall. But the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got stronger. As I turned to head back, my flashlight caught something at the edge of the tree line, just beyond the reach of the beam. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a tall, dark shape that seemed out of place among the trees. But as I focused on it, I realized it wasn't a shadow. It was something else. The figure was massive, easily over 8 feet tall, and it stood perfectly still, partially obscured by the trees. It was hard to make out details, but I could see enough to know this wasn't a person. Its body was covered in dark, matted fur, and its head was crowned with a pair of antlers that branched out like those of a massive buck. The antlers were gnarled and uneven, their jagged points catching the faint moonlight. The creature's shoulders were broad, and its muscular frame gave it an almost menacing presence. I froze. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The creature didn't move, but I could feel its gaze on me, heavy and unblinking. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at it, too scared to breathe. Then, as if it had decided I wasn't worth its attention, it turned slowly and stepped back into the trees. I couldn't hear its movements, no crunching leaves, no snapping branches. It just disappeared into the darkness. I didn't wait to see if it would come back. I spun around and bolted down the trail, my flashlight swinging wildly as I ran. The cold air burned my lungs, but I didn't stop until I was back in my yard, the warm glow of the porch light in sight. I threw open the door, slammed it shut behind me, and locked the deadbolt for good measure. I went straight to my room, still shaking, and collapsed onto my bed. For a long time, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying the encounter in my head. I couldn't convince myself it was a dream. It had felt too real. The cold, the silence, the sheer size of that thing. I didn't know what I had seen, but I knew it wasn't something that should exist. The next morning, I tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe it had been a large deer standing on its hind legs. Maybe the shadows had distorted its shape, and my mind had filled in the blanks with something monstrous. But no matter how many excuses I came up with, none of them felt right. I kept thinking about the antlers, the fur, the way it moved, or didn't move. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever seen, and I've spent enough time in the woods to know the local wildlife. I wanted to tell someone, but I didn't know how to explain it without sounding crazy. Jokingly mentioning it to friends was one thing, but admitting that I truly believed I'd seen something unnatural? That was different. So I kept it to myself, replaying the encounter in my mind over and over, trying to make sense of it. I haven't been back to those woods at night since. I still go for walks sometimes, but only during the day, when the sunlight filters through the trees and the forest feels alive with the sounds of birds and squirrels. Even then, I find myself glancing over my shoulder more often than I used to, half expecting to see that figure lurking in the shadows. Whatever it was, it left an impression on me. It wasn't just the fear, though that was part of it. It was the sense of wrongness, the feeling that I had stumbled across something I wasn't supposed to see. Maybe it was just my imagination, fueled by too many late-night horror movies and ghost stories. Or maybe there really are things out there that don't belong, things that exist on the edges of our understanding. I don't have the answers, and maybe I never will. But I know one thing for sure. Those woods are different at night, and whatever I saw that evening is a reminder that some places are better left alone. Thanks for stopping by our little campsite here at Outdoor Terrors. To hear your story on the show, send it to us at darkstories.org. For more scary stories from me, catch me on my other podcasts, Unexplained Encounters and Tales from the Break Room, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Or go to eeriecast.com for those and even more terrifying podcasts. Follow me on X or Twitter at prevails, and if you don't mind, leave a rating for Outdoor Terrors on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Till next time, I'll see you soon when the campfire blazes once again.